I was just his mother. That word should have been enough. I was staring at the blinking light above his door, counting them like prayers when his fever spiked. The nurses rushed in. I pressed my palms together so tightly they turned white. I wanted to scream to demand someone save my boy, but I just stood frozen. When he stabilized, he whispered, "Thanks." Mom threw cracked lips. That moment was enough to keep me going for weeks. I had emptied my retirement fund to pay for his additional care. When insurance didn't cover experimental treatment, I sold my car. I walked to the hospital in rain and snow. And yet, I was never bitter. Ethan was my only child. I had raised him alone after his father passed. There were nights I skipped dinner so he could have seconds. There were years I didn't buy myself new clothes, so he could join music lessons, robotics camp, and go to prom wearing a suit we couldn't afford. Love to me was never a performance. It was action, invisible, and quiet. And that's why I never expected a performance in return. But as Ethan started to recover, something subtle began to shift. His fiancée Veronica began visiting more often. She was polite but distant. She would offer me a half smile when she walked in, then quickly draw the curtains around Ethan's bed to make our space more private. I'd pretend not to notice. I thought maybe she was just overwhelmed. Cancer does that. It makes everyone feel powerless. I gave her space. One day I came in and found the two of them laughing. Ethan was propped up by pillows, color returning to his face. Veronica was feeding him yogurt. "Look who's getting strong." I smiled. She didn't smile back. Instead, she said, "Linda, maybe today you can take some time for yourself. He needs rest." I hesitated. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, Mom, you've done enough today. Go home and rest." I did as they asked. I took the bus home, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall until night bled into morning. But that was only the beginning. Veronica started showing up earlier than me. Then she'd leave notes with the nurse. "No visitors before 5 p.m., please. Patient resting." I wasn't visitors. I was his mother. But I didn't fight it. I told myself it was temporary. When Ethan was discharged, I helped set up his apartment with medical equipment. I cooked a week's worth of meals and stocked the freezer. I even bought a recliner that supported his back. Veronica barely said a word the whole time. A week later, Ethan stopped answering my calls. Texts were met with curt replies. "All good. Resting. Talk later." "Busy?" And then came the news. He was getting married. To Veronica. In a small ceremony. Intimate, they said. "You'll be there, of course," I told myself. But one morning, while cleaning out the fridge, I received a group message from a distant cousin. It had a photo Ethan and Veronica standing under a white arch, golden hour light falling on their faces. The caption, "Congratulations to the beautiful couple." No invitation, no call, not even a warning. I blinked so hard my contact lens slid out. I sat there, soup ladle still in hand, and just stared. How could I be too much for a wedding I'd dreamed of since he was born? I gave up my life for him, my freedom, my body, my future. And in return, I was invisible. Was I really not good enough? Was there something I had missed? Maybe I was blind all along. The days following Ethan's wedding passed in slow, bitter inches. I tried convincing myself it was an oversight, a misunderstanding, something I could forgive once I understood. But when I finally gathered the courage to call him, my heart broke in ways I didn't think were still possible. "Hey, Mom." Ethan answered, his voice a little rushed. I swallowed my pride. I saw the pictures. There was a pause. A long one. "Yeah, it all happened really fast." I almost laughed. "Fast. You were in remission for 4 months. That's enough time to call your mother." Another silence. Then he said it. Veronica wanted it simple. She didn't want a big deal. And there it was. Not even a "we," just her decision. I bit down on the inside of my cheek. "I changed your feeding tubes when the nurses were too busy. I held your hand when you cried in your sleep. But I wasn't good enough to be at your wedding?" "That's not fair," he said quickly. "Oh, you want to talk about fairness?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Fair is showing up for the people who saved your life." He didn't say anything, just hung up. I stared at my phone. For the first time since he was a baby, I felt like I didn't recognize my own son. That night, I poured a glass of red wine and opened a wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos of Ethan, his first birthday, his first bike prom, college graduation. Each picture was a portal to a time when he looked at me like I was his whole world. Now I was an inconvenience. But what hurt the most wasn't being excluded, it was how easily he allowed it. As if I was disposable, replaceable. A few days later, a package arrived at my doorstep. No note, no return address. Inside was a small framed photo of Ethan and Veronica, presumably from their wedding day. He was smiling. She was radiant. And I, his only family, was not even a whisper in the background. I placed the frame face down on the counter. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned into nearly a month. And not a word from him. Then one evening, just as I was closing the curtains, I saw headlights flash in my driveway. My stomach twisted. Was it Ethan? But when I opened the door, it was Veronica. She was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Her lips were tight, her eyes darting around like she was being watched. "I thought I'd stop by," she said coolly. My hand stayed on the doorframe. "Why?" She gave a short laugh. "Ethan thought it would be good if we tried." "Why now?" She shrugged. "He's worried about you. Says you're not responding to his messages." "He stopped sending them," I replied flatly. Veronica looked annoyed. "Look, Linda, I know you have this narrative in your head that you're some kind of martyr. But Ethan's grown. He's married now. We're building something new. He can't keep being your little boy forever." I froze. "I never asked him to." She pushed the casserole into my hands. "Then act like it." And with that, she turned and walked off. I didn't throw the dish out, though every bone in my body wanted to. Instead, I placed it in the fridge. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe defiance. That night, I wrote Ethan a letter. A real one. Handwritten. "Ethan, I loved you before you had a name. Before you had a face. When you were just a heartbeat inside of me, I knew I would die for you. And then years later, I almost did, watching you suffer. Watching cancer steal pieces of you. I didn't need thanks. But I did expect respect. I raised you to be better than this. Maybe that was my mistake. Love always. Mom." I didn't send it. I folded it neatly and slid it into the back of the photo frame Veronica had sent. It felt like poetic justice, a hidden truth behind a smiling lie. I tried moving on. I began volunteering at the local hospice center. I figured if Ethan didn't need me, maybe someone else did. And then one afternoon, while tending to a patient, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Ethan collapsed. "We're at St. Luke's." My legs gave out before I finished reading. I raced to the hospital, breathless tears streaming down my cheeks. The same corridors. The same antiseptic smell. The same pit in my stomach. When I arrived, Veronica was sitting outside the ICU, arms folded, mascara running. "What happened?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "He passed out in the shower. Hit his head," she said, her tone clipped. "They're doing scans. I want to see him." She hesitated. "Now's not a good time." I stepped past her. I wasn't going to be shut out this time. The ICU doors hissed open with a mechanical shudder as I pushed through. A nurse looked up and started to say something, but I was already halfway down the hallway. My feet moved on their own muscle memory from too many visits during his chemotherapy days. Ethan lay still on the hospital bed, pale and quiet, monitors blinking steadily around him. A small bandage on his forehead marked where he'd hit the shower tiles. Tubes fed into his arm and oxygen threaded gently into his nose. My breath caught. He looked so young again, vulnerable, like the boy I used to soothe through fevers and growing pains. Not the man who forgot to invite me to his wedding. Not the stranger who let his wife speak for him. Just my son. I walked closer, gently brushing my hand over his hair. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. "You scared me again. You always do this, don't you?" He didn't stir. But I kept talking. "I don't care how angry I've been. I don't care what you said. Or what you didn't say. I'm here. Always." A tear slipped down my cheek and landed on his pillow. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. I turned. "Veronica." "He's stable," she said. Arms crossed. "They think it might have been stress-related. His blood pressure's been high." "Stress," I repeated, not hiding my disbelief. "From what?" "The wedding. The lying. The pretending everything is fine." She ignored my tone. "Look, I didn't come here to fight." "You never come to fight. You just send your husband to do your dirty work," I snapped. Her jaw tensed. You think you're some saint, don't you? That. Just because you cleaned up after him during cancer, he owes you forever. I stepped closer. It's not about owing me. It's about decency. You shut me out of his life. You didn't want me there. And you think being there would have made things easier? She shot back. You smother him. You always have. The words hit harder than they should have. For a second I wondered if she was right. Maybe I had held on too tightly, poured too much of myself into Ethan. I had no one else. His father was long gone, and my own family drifted apart years ago. Ethan had been my lighthouse, my anchor. But maybe in trying to protect him, I'd wrapped him in a cage of motherly love. Still, I straightened. I was there when he needed me. You weren't. Veronica's eyes narrowed. You think you're the only one who can love him? He didn't even want you at the wedding, Linda. That wasn't just me. He said he didn't want drama, didn't want to feel like a child again. I flinched. She continued. You can keep pretending you're the victim here, but maybe you're part of the problem. She turned and walked away, her heels echoing in the sterile hallway. I sank into the chair beside Ethan and held his hand, trying to find the warmth that had once lived in his grip. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had smothered him with my sacrifices. Maybe in being everything to him, I left no space for him to become someone without me. But even if I had flaws, was I supposed to be discarded like a used napkin? Forgotten. The next few days were a blur of doctors, slow improvements, and awkward silences between me and Veronica. Ethan stayed unconscious for 2 days, then groggily came to confused and irritated. When he finally recognized me, his first words were, "Mom, you're here." I smiled, too exhausted to respond with anything but a nod. He squeezed my fingers weakly. The days that followed were gentler. I fed him soup when the nurses were busy, helped him walk when the physical therapist was short-staffed. Once again, I slipped into caregiver mode and he didn't protest. But there was a wedge between us, invisible and heavy. One evening, as he sat propped up in bed, he looked at me and said, "Why didn't you just tell me how you felt?" I blinked. "About what?" "Everything. The wedding." "Veronica, I know you're mad." Mad didn't cover it. I was devastated. But I kept my voice calm. "You should have talked to me first, before letting her shut me out." He sighed. "I didn't know how. I thought you'd guilt me. And you didn't think excluding me would—" He didn't reply. Just looked away. A long silence fell between us. But this one wasn't full of anger. It was full of something else. Regret, maybe. Or distance. "I'm not trying to control you, Ethan," I said softly. I've always been there. It's hard to be nowhere." He looked down. "I know." And in that moment, I realized that healing wouldn't come from an apology. It would come from small choices every day where he chose to include me again. But I wasn't going to beg for it. The following morning, the nurse wheeled Ethan out for some scans, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my phone. I hadn't checked messages in hours. There were a few from my friend Natalie, one from my neighbor reminding me to water the plants, and a missed call from my supervisor at the library. That last one gave me pause. I hadn't been into work in over a week. Ever since the wedding fiasco, I hadn't had the emotional bandwidth to do much of anything, and then Ethan's hospital stay had consumed me again, like a familiar fire rekindled in my chest. My absence was technically covered by my remaining sick days, but not for long. I texted back quickly, promising to return next week, even though I wasn't sure I meant it. When Ethan came back into the room, he was groggy but smiled faintly. I adjusted his blanket instinctively, tucking him in like I had when he was a boy. He didn't pull away. "You always do that," he mumbled. "What? Tuck me in like I'm 5. I laughed softly. "Old habits." He paused. "It's not bad. Just familiar?" For a moment, something passed between us. Warm, fragile, but it shattered quickly. Veronica entered with a tray of smoothies and a new energy. Her high heels clicked across the tile floor like a metronome, keeping time in our strained orchestra. She handed Ethan his favorite mango blend, kissed his forehead, then turned to me. "You should get some rest," she said, not unkindly but firmly. "You've been here nonstop." "I'm fine," I replied. Ethan looked between us, then spoke with hesitation. "Actually, Mom, maybe take a break." Just for a bit. It was like déjà vu. The same push to the sidelines. Politely phrased exile. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Sure. I'll head home for a change of clothes. Veronica smiled too quickly. As I walked out of the room, the ache in my chest wasn't just emotional. It was physical. Sharp hollow. I didn't want to leave him. Not again. The drive home was quiet. I passed the bakery we used to visit on Saturdays. The bench where he waited for the school bus. Every corner of our neighborhood whispered memories that now belonged to a different life. Back at my house, I opened the door to silence. My living room felt unfamiliar, as if I were entering someone else's space. I stood there unsure of what to do. Eventually, I brewed tea and sat by the window. I looked out over the street, watching people walk their dogs, children ride bikes. Life was moving on without me. Then came the sound of my voicemail tone. It was from Ethan's doctor. Mrs. Whitman, this is Dr. Allen. We'd like to speak with you and Ethan together about some new test results. It's not urgent, but please let us know when you're available. My stomach twisted. New test results. I called back immediately and was told they'd scheduled a consult for the next afternoon. I texted Ethan. Me. Just got a call from Dr. Allen. We need to talk tomorrow. Together. Ethan. Okay. Veronica already told me. She'll be there too. Of course she would. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every word Veronica had said at the hospital. Every clipped gesture. Every moment Ethan looked at her for confirmation before speaking. Was I truly smothering? Was I the antagonist in their story? No. I had spent sleepless nights beside his hospital bed when the chemo left him trembling and vomiting. I'd bathed him when he couldn't stand. I'd sold my wedding ring, the last piece of his father I owned, to cover his experimental treatment. And now I wasn't good enough to invite. The next day I arrived early at the hospital. Ethan was already dressed in a hoodie and sweatpants, looking healthier than I'd seen him in days. Veronica sat beside him, scrolling on her phone. Doctor. Allen entered with a clipboard and a kind but serious expression. We've reviewed Ethan's scans, he said. There's no cancer recurrence, which is good news. I exhaled. However, he continued, there are early signs of cardiac stress. We think the fainting episode may have been compounded by emotional and physical burnout. He looked at Ethan. You've been pushing too hard. The wedding, the travel, the work. Your body's telling you to slow down. Ethan nodded. I've been feeling it. Veronica reached for his hand. We'll make some changes. Less stress. Better routines. Doctor, Allen turned to me. Your care during his illness likely prevented this from escalating sooner. You were critical to his recovery. I blinked, caught off guard by the acknowledgement. Veronica didn't speak. After the meeting, Ethan walked me to the parking lot against the nurse's advice. You didn't have to do that. I told him. You should rest. I wanted to, he replied. We stood by my car. A breeze rustled the trees around us. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I looked at him. For everything he added, the wedding, the way things happened, I messed up. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I know you love her, I said. But love shouldn't mean exclusion. He nodded. I know, it wasn't a complete fix, but it was something, a crack in the wall he'd built. A signal that maybe he still saw me. That moment in the parking lot lingered with me like the scent of lilacs in the spring, faint but persistent. Ethan had apologized. It wasn't everything, but it was the first real crack in the ice. And I clung to it. I drove home feeling oddly weightless, as though the constant pressure in my chest had finally shifted, if only slightly. I wanted to believe we were mending, that, perhaps with time, we could rebuild what had been broken. But hope is a tricky thing. It can blind as much as it can guide. The following week, Ethan was discharged. Veronica brought him home to their sleek condo uptown, the one I had only visited once before, a place that never quite felt like home, not even for Ethan. Too modern, too cold. He texted me occasionally, mostly to update me on follow-ups or to say thank you. But something about the tone felt curated, like a customer service message rather than a son's thoughts. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from Natalie. Claire, she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. I know you're trying to move forward, but I think you need to know something. My stomach clenched. What is it? I was at a dinner last night with Marcia, remember her? She's friends with Veronica's aunt. Apparently, there's been talk that Veronica thinks you were too controlling during Ethan's illness. That you overstepped. I went cold. That you didn't let them build their relationship independently, Natalie continued. And that she made sure you weren't involved in the wedding because she was afraid you'd make it all about you. I didn't speak for a full minute. Claire, I know this hurts, but if there's more going on, if she's influencing how he sees you, you need to be careful. I thanked her and hung up numb. Was this really how Veronica saw me? Not as a mother desperate to save her son's life, but as a nuisance, an obstacle. Later that night, I sat with old photo albums. Ethan in his high school cap and gown. Ethan at 8 beaming next to a science fair project. Ethan in bed at 8 years old, his head sweaty with fever and me beside him cradling his hand. The memories played like a film in my mind. But that wasn't the life he seemed to remember. 1 week later, I finally got the answer I didn't want. Ethan invited me to a casual brunch at their place. I accepted despite the knot in my stomach. Maybe he was trying to reach out. Maybe this was progress. When I arrived, I was greeted by the familiar sterile interior white furniture, polished granite countertops, chrome everywhere. Veronica hugged me brief and cool. The table was set perfectly, every fork aligned. As we sat down, Veronica smiled over her mimosa. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something, Claire." My gut twisted. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're thinking of starting a family soon." I blinked. That's wonderful." Veronica nodded. "Yes, and we've been planning ahead. Which brings us to the house. What about it?" "Our house," she clarified. "We've been thinking of making it more child-friendly. That means some adjustments to our routines." I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I think it's time you started visiting less," she said calmly. "Not because we don't appreciate you, but we need space." There it was. The real purpose of the brunch. A soft eviction. "I don't visit that often," I replied. "You're still around," she said, her voice low. "And Ethan needs to focus on his new family." Ethan finally looked up. "Mom, it's not forever. We're just trying to set boundaries." I swallowed hard. "Boundaries. You were there for me in ways I can't even explain," he said. "But now things are different." I pushed my chair back slowly. "You're right. They are." I stood up and looked at my son. The boy I raised, the man I carried through cancer. The stranger before me. "I hope your child never feels what I'm feeling right now," I whispered. Veronica's face tightened. "Claire," but I was already walking to the door. When I stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, it was like breaking through the surface of water. I could breathe again, and I made a decision. They wanted space. They would get it, but I wasn't going to be discarded quietly. Not after everything. The air outside felt thinner somehow, as if the world had stretched itself open just enough to swallow my grief. I walked slowly down their pristine sidewalk, heels clicking against the concrete, like punctuation to every word unspoken at that table. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat still in the silence of my little living room, hands folded like a schoolgirl awaiting her fate. I looked around at the modest furniture, the mismatched cushions, the photographs on the shelves. This house had never been fancy, but it had been mine. Filled with love, effort, sacrifice. And suddenly it hit me. How long had I been building other people's castles while leaving my own in disrepair? I spent so many years keeping Ethan's world intact, cooking, cleaning, folding his clothes until midnight, fighting with doctors when he was too weak to speak. And when he was well again, when life offered him color once more, he painted me out of the picture. Not entirely out of cruelty. No, I wasn't going to let myself believe that. But out of convenience. Out of comfort. That hurt even more. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fade quietly. I wasn't going to become the forgotten matriarch sipping lukewarm tea in the shadows of her child's new life. I called Natalie. She picked up on the second ring. "Claire, I need a lawyer." There was silence then, a sharp inhale. "For what?" "My will, my savings. I want to change everything." We scheduled an appointment. I gathered every document I had, bank statements, investments, insurance titles. Years of savings, Careful decisions and small sacrifices had quietly added up to a sizable portfolio. Almost $400,000 in stocks, over $200,000 in mutual funds, property equity, and a modest pension from the school district. I had always assumed Ethan would inherit it all. But now I realized that inheritance wasn't a right. It was a gift, and gifts should be given to those who value them. At the attorney's office, I sat across from a man in wire-rimmed glasses who looked at me as if I were about to ask for something illegal. "I want to revise the beneficiaries," I said. "To whom?" I took a deep breath. "A scholarship fund for single mothers going back to school." He blinked. "Not your son." "No," I said with a calm I barely understood. "I want it to go to women who are forgotten. Like me." I left the office with a copy of the new will. It felt like holding my own redemption in my hands. Days passed. Then weeks. Ethan didn't call. Not once. But I kept living. I took up painting. Joined a community class at the rec center. Made friends, real ones, who didn't see me as an accessory to someone else's life. I started walking every morning, listening to old jazz records at night. And I smiled more. One Thursday afternoon, as I was watering the plants on my porch, I saw a familiar car pull up. "Ethan!" He got out slowly, looking around like he hadn't been there in years. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "Ethan." I wanted to talk. I stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the couch, nervous. "I know I've been distant. You have, and I know Veronica can be strong-willed." I raised an eyebrow. He looked down. "She didn't want me to come. I figured, but I couldn't stop thinking about you." He went on. "Everything you did for me, I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," I said, voice firm. "But respect, that was free, and you didn't give it." He winced. "I never wanted to be in your way, Ethan," I said. "I wanted to see you thrive. But thriving doesn't mean forgetting who helped you stand." He looked at me, then really looked. "I messed up?" "I know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded photo. It was of the two of us taken years ago. My arms were around him, his head bald from chemo, both of us smiling through the storm. "I keep this in my wallet," he said. My heart twisted. "But it's not enough," he continued. "I need to do better. If you'll let me." I stared at the photo, at the boy I knew hidden beneath the man before me. Forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. And I wasn't ready yet. But I nodded. "I'll think about it." Ethan came by a few more times after that, always alone, always with some nervous smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd talk about work, the house, even Veronica, but he never once asked about me. Not really. Not about my art class or the walks I took at dawn. Not about the book club I'd joined at the library. My life, it seemed, was still invisible to him. But I had changed. There was a quiet resilience forming in the marrow of my bones, a kind of certainty I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer the mother who waited by the phone, or the woman who would drop everything just to feel needed again. One morning, I got a letter in the mail, a wedding announcement. "Ethan and Veronica Whitmore cordially invite you to celebrate their love on Saturday 4 p.m. at the Sequoia Estate." It was a glossy card, all gold lettering and cream lace. No personal note. "No, we hope you'll be there, Mom." Just a formality. The RSVP box was blank. For the briefest moment, I thought of checking yes, buying a new dress, showing up, and smiling for the cameras. But then I remembered the way I'd been told I wasn't good enough. Not once, not twice, but constantly, in microaggressions and silences and glances passed between two people who forgot the value of a quiet sacrifice. I set the card down. I didn't check the box. The day of the wedding came. I knew where it would be. The Sequoia Estate was only 30 minutes away, a sprawling venue used mostly by old money and new influencers. I'd never set foot in it. Never thought I would. But curiosity can be a dangerous companion. At 3:55 p.m., I found myself pulling into the very edge of the parking lot, far from the guests. I didn't get out. I just watched. Cars arrived one by one. Women in sleek gowns stepped out with practiced grace. Men in suits clutched gift bags and expensive cufflinks. Music wafted across the air. Soft jazz laughter, camera shutters clicking like applause. Then I saw them. Ethan and Veronica posing under an arch of white roses. He looked polished. She looked radiant. Together they looked like a painting of the perfect couple. And yet I saw at the tightness in Ethan's jaw. The forced smile. A flicker of something almost like regret. I drove away, not in anger, not in pain, but in peace. Because here's the truth. No one tells you. Sometimes the ultimate act of self-respect isn't standing up at the front, but walking away with dignity. Back at home, I opened my laptop. I went to my emails and clicked on the scholarship fund setup form. It was time. Time to give with purpose. I entered the details. The Claire Whitman Foundation, a grant that would go out annually to a single parent pursuing a degree in nursing or caregiving. Preference would be given to those who had put someone else's life above their own. In the why section I wrote, because love without gratitude can rot a soul. Because care without acknowledgement can become a cage. Because no one who sacrifices everything should be made to feel like nothing. I hit submit. I exhaled. The next morning my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Thank you for everything, Mom. I know I never said it enough, but I mean it. Always. I stared at the screen. Then I turned it off. Some messages don't need replies. Not yet. The message from Ethan lingered in my mind like a song you hear once and can't quite forget. Thank you for everything, Mom. I know I never said it enough, but I mean it. Always. A part of me wanted to believe it. To screenshot it, print it out, fold it into a keepsake. But another part, the part that had stood in that hospital room while he cried through chemo, the part that had folded his laundry and made him soup while he slept for 16 hours a day, knew better. Words come easy when there's guilt. Actions, those are what cost something. And so I let the message sit. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I went for a walk. There's something sacred about morning air. The world hasn't quite woken up yet, and it feels like everything is waiting to be written again. I passed the bakery, the library, the little bench under the sycamore tree. Places that had held me up in silence when no one else knew I was falling. I thought of all the times I'd put Ethan first. When his father left and I worked double shifts. When he missed curfew and I stayed up in tears. When he got cancer and I canceled my entire life to make sure he'd have one. And when he chose her, not once, but over and over, it was a choice I could live with. But now I would choose myself. I signed up for a pottery class. I updated my will. I started painting again. My hands remembered the strokes, even if my heart had forgotten the joy. And then, something unexpected happened, a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my apron still dusted with clay. It was Ethan. He stood there in jeans and a wrinkled shirt holding a bouquet of hydrangeas, the kind I used to grow in the backyard. Hi, Mom. His voice was low, hesitant. I stepped aside. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply observed. He walked into the kitchen looking around like it was unfamiliar. How have you been? Good, I said. Busy? I've been thinking a lot, he said, setting the flowers on the counter. About what? About you. About how I treated you. About Veronica. I raised an eyebrow. She's pregnant, he added. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. That's good news? Congratulations. He looked down. His shoulders slumped. I've been wondering if I even deserve to be a father. After how I treated mine. And you. I said nothing. Silence was sharper than any scolding. He continued. I didn't realize how much I took for granted until lately. I was caught up in building a life, and I left out the one person who built me. My throat tightened. Veronica and we're not in a great place, he admitted. She didn't want me to invite you. Said it'd be awkward or that you'd make it about you. I gave a bitter laugh. Make your wedding about me. He nodded. I see now how ridiculous that sounds. She didn't know how to make space for you. And I didn't fight for you to have one. Still, I said nothing. Finally, he whispered, Can you forgive me? I turned to the window. The sunlight hit the edges of the ceramic piece I was drying, a mother holding a child. Both cracked, both still whole. I don't think it's about forgiveness anymore, I said softly. It's about boundaries and healing. For both of us. Ethan nodded slowly. I'd like to try. I nodded back. So would I. He reached for the flowers and placed them in the sink. Do you have a vase? I'll find one. We stood in that small, quiet kitchen, mother and son, not healed, not whole, but maybe starting. The vase I chose was one Ethan had made in elementary school. It was crooked, slightly chipped on the rim, and painted with uneven blue streaks that had long since faded. But I had kept it. Through all the moves, all the heartbreaks, all the chapters where I felt invisible in his life, I had kept it. And now I placed his hydrangeas in it like some full-circle gesture that neither of us dared speak out loud. Ethan sat at the kitchen table watching me. His eyes scanned the room, resting for a moment on the framed photo near the bookshelf, the one of us at his high school graduation. His arm was slung around my shoulders in the picture, his face youthful and full of promise. I was such a different person back then, he said, as if reading my thoughts. You were young, I replied. We both were. He nodded, tracing the rim of his coffee mug with a finger. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if Dad hadn't left? I sat down across from him, the chair creaking beneath me. Sometimes, but mostly I've learned not to chase ghosts. He chuckled faintly. You always did know how to say things better than me. We fell into a silence that wasn't awkward this time. It was reflective, heavy with history. He finally broke it. I didn't come here just to apologize. Oh, I need your advice about the baby. And there it was, the shift from guilt to need, like so many times before. But something in his tone told me this wasn't just dependency. This was fear, real grown man fear. I'm scared, Mom, he confessed. What if I mess it all up? What if I become the kind of father who disappears like mine? I leaned forward. Then don't. Stay. Fight through the hard days. Show up even when it's easier to walk away. He looked at me, his eyes glassy. That's what you did, isn't it? I smiled faintly. Every single day. The kettle whistled from the stove. I stood to make tea, and he followed me to the sink. I miss this, he said quietly. Just talking to you. I poured hot water into the cups. Relationships need tending, Ethan. Just like gardens. You don't get to ignore them and expect them to bloom. He took a breath. I want to be better. Then start. Not with promises, but with actions. He nodded. I handed him the tea. Let's take it one step at a time. He sipped, wincing at the heat, then grinned. Still too hot. Some things never change. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. Really laughed. He stayed for dinner that night. Helped me chop vegetables even though he mangled the onions. He talked about his job, his fears, and surprisingly, his regrets. Real ones. Not just words on a screen. I should have fought harder for you at the wedding, he said as we washed dishes. I let her convince me it would ruin the vibe to have my mom there, but the real ruin was pretending you didn't exist. I didn't reply. Some apologies don't need responses. They just need to be heard. Before he left, he hugged me tightly. Not the kind of hug that checks a box, but the kind that says something without saying anything. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. We'll see, I said, half smiling. And then he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the night air cool against my skin. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty this time. I walked back to the kitchen, placed the vase on the windowsill, and looked at it. His flowers, in his old creation, blooming again. Maybe, just maybe, we were both trying. The next morning, I didn't wake up alone. Not in the literal sense, of course. The house was still mine and mine only. But something had shifted. I felt it in my chest, lighter. A breeze had pushed through the thick curtains of bitterness, and though it hadn't cleared the air completely, it had stirred it. Ethan called, just as he said he would. His voice sounded clearer, more grounded. Morning, Mom. Just checking in. I know it's early. I wanted to catch you before work. It had been years since he cared about my schedule. We chatted briefly, about nothing and everything. The baby's due date, his wife's strange cravings for cucumbers dipped in peanut butter, his hesitations about picking out the right crib. He asked me what I was doing that weekend. I hesitated. He caught it. Mom, would you come over? Just for lunch. It's just us. No weirdness. No weirdness. A funny promise considering how strange it all still felt. I'll think about it, I said gently. He didn't push, That Saturday, I stood outside their home again. This time, I held no luggage. Only a bouquet of fresh lavender from my garden and a container of homemade lentil stew, his favorite from childhood. My armor of quiet, motherly gestures. The door opened. Ethan stood there with the baby bump. Well, his wife just behind him. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Progress, maybe, Mom, Ethan said with a genuine brightness. Come in. I stepped into the same house that had once evicted me like an unwanted guest. Everything was still pristine, but this time it didn't feel like a stage set for performance. It felt like a home. Their home. I caught a glimpse of the nursery as I passed the hallway. Painted pale yellow. A rocking chair in the corner. Books stacked high already. Lunch was simple grilled cheese and tomato soup. The same meal I'd made for him after every scraped knee and failed test. You remembered, I said, glancing at my bowl. Ethan smiled. How could I forget? Conversation was light but natural. His wife Harper chimed in now and then, mostly about the baby. I could tell she was trying too, in her own stiff, cautious way. I read that swaddling is back in, she said. You know, like they did in the 80s. I raised an eyebrow. Swaddling never left. People just keep rebranding it. She blinked, then laughed. A real one. It surprised both of us. After lunch, Ethan pulled out a photo album. It was old. Dusty. I didn't even know he still had it. Do you remember this? He asked, flipping to a picture of us on a beach trip. My arm was around him. He was sunburned, and I was laughing with my mouth wide open, unapologetically joyful. I remember. That was the summer you refused to wear sunscreen, I replied. He chuckled. And you made me slather on aloe for 2 weeks. I told you it wouldn't make you look cool. You were right. We flipped pages, memory after memory. A history I had thought he buried now resurrected on glossy pages. Then he turned to a blank one. What's this for? I asked. For new memories, he said. I didn't cry. Not then. Later that evening, I sat in my own kitchen, the lavender bouquet in a jar by the sink, and let the tears fall. It wasn't about being invited. It wasn't about the wedding or even the dismissal. It was about being remembered, about being seen, about reclaiming a space that was always mine, not through entitlement, but through love earned in the trenches of motherhood. The story wasn't finished. Healing isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway, long and unpredictable, with some locked rooms you never open. But I had taken a step, and so had he. I didn't hear from Harper for 2 weeks after that lunch. Not a text, not a thank you, not a photo of the nursery. Nothing. But I wasn't surprised. And for once, I didn't take silence as rejection. I understood by now that not everyone heals at the same speed or in the same way. Then out of the blue, she messaged me. Hi, Clara. Would you be free to come with me to a prenatal appointment? Ethan's stuck at work. I stared at my phone. My first instinct was to reread it. Make sure it wasn't a mistake. Then I thought, maybe she didn't have anyone else. Maybe she was trying. Maybe this was her own form of apology, an act, not an explanation. I replied, of course. Just let me know the time. That Thursday, I sat in the quiet waiting room of a prenatal clinic next to the woman who once wanted me out of her house. She looked nervous, twisting a tissue in her hands, her leg bouncing. You okay? I asked. She nodded. I just don't like doing these things alone. I didn't say you didn't have to be alone. Instead, I said I'm here now. The doctor called her in, and she looked at me unsure. I stood up. Let's go. The room was dimmed. A soft glow from the monitor lit Harper's face as the ultrasound began. The baby appeared on the screen like a tiny astronaut floating through a soft black sky. The heartbeat pulsed. Fast. Sure. Alive. Harper's eyes welled up. I reached for her hand, not thinking, just reacting. She squeezed back. We didn't talk much afterward. But when I dropped her home, she turned to me and said, I'm sorry. I blinked. For what? For everything she said. Voice thin but sincere. For being cold? For not seeing how much you did for Ethan? For not realizing you were already part of this family before I ever came along? I didn't respond right away. It was too much to absorb. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a tiny crocheted elephant I'd made that week, and handed it to her. It's not store-bought, I said, smiling. Harper clutched it like it was gold. It's perfect. In the weeks that followed, she messaged more often. Not every day, not all the time, but often enough to build a new rhythm between us. She'd send ultrasound updates, ask questions about baby names, even joked that she might need help planning a baby shower. One day she texted, "What do you think of the name Clara?" I stared at it for a full minute. Then I replied, "It's strong." That weekend, Ethan came over alone. We had coffee on my porch. No distractions. Just us like the old days before everything grew complicated. He said, "You know, Mom." I was wrong. I didn't say anything. I let him speak. I let pride get in the way. And guilt. I couldn't face how much I'd leaned on you for years, and then how quickly I shut you out when someone else became important. "Ethan," I said gently, "you didn't just shut me out. You erased me." He winced. "I know. I hate that. I think about it every day." We sat in silence, sipping our drinks. A breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine. "I want you at the baby shower," he said. "And I want you in the delivery room if you're willing." I looked at him, my eyes stinging. Of course I'm willing. I was always willing. And just like that, something cracked open in the place where pain had settled. Not all of it, but enough. Because healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in small moments. In ultrasound rooms, in crocheted elephants, in names whispered across generations, and in invitations you thought would never arrive. A month later, I stood in the middle of a baby shower I never imagined I'd be part of. It was held in Harper's parents' backyard, strung with fairy lights and pastel streamers, with tables covered in mason jars of lemonade and plates of finger sandwiches. There was even a little table labeled "Advice for the New Mom" with blank cards and colored pens. At first, I felt like an outsider again. The guests were mostly Harper's friends, glossy women with perfect nails and curated laughs. But as soon as Harper saw me arrive, she rushed over in her soft pink maternity dress and pulled me into a hug. "You came," she said, like she still couldn't believe it. I wouldn't miss it. She led me around, introducing me as Ethan's mom, but also more than once as the woman who kept our family standing when things fell apart. It hit me then how different this moment was from all the others. No more pretending I was invisible. No more erasure. Just truth, messy and tender. Ethan came later, helping with games and gifts. He handed me a chair when I looked tired, offered me a plate without asking, watched Harper with such calm admiration, it softened something in me further. During one lull, I sat at the advice table and wrote, "Let them cry when they need to. Let yourself cry too. And remember, babies don't need perfect mothers, just ones who love enough to stay." I didn't sign my name. I left it on the pile with the others. After cake and hugs and dozens of photos, Harper walked me to my car. She was holding her belly with both hands glowing in that way expectant mothers sometimes do. "You know," she said, "when I first moved in with Ethan, I thought you and I were fighting for the same space in his heart." I opened the car door but paused. "Were we?" She shook her head. "No, I just didn't know it yet." Then she added, "You never made me feel small." I made myself feel that way by comparing. I reached over and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, something my mother used to do when words were too big. "It's not a competition," I said. "There's always room to love more." When I drove home, my heart felt like a quiet lake, still and wide, reflective. But the real moment, the one I never expected, came weeks later when I got a phone call at midnight. "Mom." Ethan's voice was breathless. "It's happening." Her water broke. "Can you meet us at the hospital?" I didn't pack a bag. I just grabbed my keys and drove. The hospital was quiet and fluorescent when I arrived. Ethan met me at the entrance, then led me up. Harper was in a gown, hair matted to her forehead, gripping the side rails of the bed. She looked at me and whimpered, "Don't leave." "I'm here," I whispered, and I stayed. For hours. I held her hand while she screamed, held her hair while she vomited, held her spirit together when it threatened to break. When the baby finally arrived, a little girl with Harper's lips and Ethan's brow, I stood beside them as they cried. They let me cut the cord. They named her Grace. I didn't cry until much later when I sat in the corner of the room, watching Ethan cradle his daughter. Harper's head lay against his shoulder, eyes fluttering closed in pure exhaustion. Then Ethan looked up and said, "Mom, want to hold her." And that was the moment. The one that erased every cold dinner, every closed door, every invitation I never received. I held Grace against my chest, her tiny heartbeat echoing under her onesie. She smelled like the beginning of the world. I looked down at her and whispered, "You don't know this yet, little one, but we fought wars to make room for you." I didn't need an apology anymore. I had something better. I had a future. Grace was only a few days old when the shift became permanent. I stayed with them for the first 2 weeks, not in their home, but at a guest suite nearby. Ethan insisted on covering the cost. "You'll be more comfortable there, Mom, and close enough if we need help." He didn't realize how much those words meant. Not because of the money, but because he finally saw me as something valuable, needed, trusted. Every morning I brought them homemade broth and fresh fruit. Not because they asked, but because I remembered how exhausting those early days were. I remembered what it felt like to be alone at 2 a.m., holding a baby who wouldn't stop crying, wondering if motherhood would ever get easier. Harper didn't try to hide her exhaustion, and I didn't judge her for it. One morning, I found her sitting on the floor sobbing silently while Grace wailed in her crib. Without asking, I knelt beside her, scooped the baby up, and whispered, "Go take a shower. I've got this." She didn't argue, just nodded and disappeared into the bathroom, tears still falling. That moment sealed it. From that day forward, we stopped being mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We became something more fragile and real women who understood each other in the trenches of sleep deprivation and postpartum fear. One afternoon, as we watched Grace sleep on the couch, Harper turned to me and said, "I didn't know I needed a mother figure in my life until you showed up." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. Eventually I said, "You don't have to call me Mom. Just don't shut me out." "I won't," she promised. When Ethan returned from work that day, Harper was napping and I was holding Grace, humming a lullaby I used to sing to him as a baby. He stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking. "She looks like you when you hold her," he said. I smiled. "I think she has your ears." He chuckled. Then a pause. "Mom, I know I haven't said this, but thank you for everything, for staying even when I pushed you away." I looked up. I never left Ethan. I just stepped back. "That's worse," he whispered. "I should have asked you to come closer." That night, they invited me to dinner not out of obligation, but because they wanted me there. We laughed. Ate lasagna. Harper had tried to cook but overbaked. I told stories of Ethan's childhood that made him groan in embarrassment and Harper giggle. They asked me to move in with them not forever, but until Grace turned 1. They said it like a gift, but it felt like grace. "I don't want to intrude." I hesitated. "You're not," Harper said, reaching for my hand. "You're part of the village now." That phrase stayed with me, not family by blood or title, but by showing up, by holding hands during storms and staying through the mess. Later in my room, I unpacked a small suitcase and placed a framed photo of young Ethan on the dresser. I sat on the bed and looked around the room. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't surviving. I was home. I began to understand that healing isn't loud. It isn't dramatic, like the shattering of glass or the slamming of doors. It's quiet, like a drawer finally closing right, or laughter filling a space that used to echo with silence. A month into living with Ethan and Harper, I had become part of their rhythm, not as a guest, not even as a helper. I was simply present. Each morning, I prepared breakfast while Harper caught up on sleep. I changed Grace's diapers before Ethan even finished his coffee, and when night fell, I tiptoed into the nursery just to watch that little chest rise and fall with life. There was no resentment, no fatigue, just peace. One evening, Ethan came home early. I was folding laundry, humming a tune, when he stood at the door holding something behind his back. "Peace offering," he said. I raised a brow. "Another apology," he chuckled. "Not quite. Just something overdue." He revealed a small velvet box. I blinked. "Is that—" "It's not jewelry, Mom. Just open it." Inside was a delicate silver locket engraved with Grace's name and birth date. "I wanted you to have something that reminds you she wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. For what you did for me." It took me a moment to speak. "That's beautiful." "There's a picture inside," he added. I clicked the locket open and gasped. On one side, a baby photo of Grace. On the other, a much younger Ethan, maybe 10, clinging to me after winning a little league game. Both smiling, both mine. I closed the locket and hugged him hard. Later that night, Harper joined me in the kitchen. We shared wine. We laughed about nothing. And then she said something I'll never forget. "I was jealous of you." I blinked. "What?" "When I first met Ethan, you were the woman he loved most." I didn't know how to measure up. I laughed. "Harper, I never wanted to be compared." "I know. But I was immature. I didn't see how much you gave until I became a mother. And now I don't want Grace to grow up without you." I placed my hand over hers. "She won't. Not if you'll have me." The rest of the evening melted into soft music and clinking glasses. I thought of the early days of IV tubes, of hospital meals, of late-night prayers whispered into sterile air. I thought of being excluded from the wedding that should have been my celebration too. But then I thought of now, of laughter, of trust rebuilt, of love returned without conditions. Healing was quiet, but I was living proof that it existed. That night, I wrote a letter I never planned to send. To the version of me who thought she wasn't enough. You always were. They just needed time to see it. I woke up to the sound of Grace giggling. The sun was filtering through soft curtains, dancing on the hardwood floors of Ethan and Harper's home, my home now too. I got out of bed, my joints protesting only slightly, and followed the laughter down the hallway. There she was, my granddaughter now, 10 months old, standing in her crib with a toothy grin, holding her arms out to me. It was a moment so ordinary yet so perfect, I felt tears prick at my eyes. As I scooped her up, she buried her face in my shoulder and let out a happy sigh. That sound, unburdened, pure, was the final thread in the tapestry of my healing. A life once stitched with duty and sacrifice, now wove with love, freely given and finally reciprocated. After breakfast, Harper and I took Grace to the park. We sat on a bench watching her attempt her first steps on the grass. She kept toppling over, determined but wobbly like life itself. "I never thought I'd get to this point," I said, eyes still on Grace. "To see her walk." "No," I smiled. "To feel at peace." Harper reached over, squeezing my hand gently. "You earned it." When we got back home, Ethan surprised me again. "Mom," he said, holding up a sheet of paper, "I need you to sign something." I squinted. "What is this?" "A deed." I blinked. "To what?" He smiled. "This house. We've added you to the title. It's your home too. You've been living like it is. It's only right." My hands trembled. "Ethan, you don't have to." "I know," he interrupted. "But we want to. You took care of me when I couldn't walk, couldn't eat, couldn't live. And then we turned our backs on you. That will never happen again." There was silence, thick, charged, full of unspoken apologies. But also something else. Healing, love, permanence. Later that evening, I stood in the backyard watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of crimson and tangerine. Grace was asleep. Ethan and Harper were inside dancing in the living room, their laughter floating through the screen door. And I, Claire Whitman, 58, once discarded, now cherished, finally felt whole. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed something brief. Maybe it would be a post someday. Maybe it was just for me. I nursed him through cancer. Then I was told I wasn't good enough to be at his wedding. But healing came not through revenge, but through forgiveness. New beginnings and a granddaughter who changed everything. I smiled and closed the app. There was no bitterness left in me, only space for love. Space I had made by enduring, by giving, by surviving the ache of being forgotten, and the beauty of being remembered again. For anyone listening now feeling like their love has gone unnoticed, unvalued, hold on. Sometimes they need to grow into the space you carved for them. And when they do, it's more beautiful than you can imagine. There was a time when I would lie awake and wonder what I had done wrong. How had I gone from nurse to ghost? From mother to outsider? But here's what no one tells you about being a mother. Sometimes you love in silence, hoping the echo will return. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes, just sometimes, it comes back amplified by years of missed chances, carried on the laughter of a grandchild, healed by hugs that don't need explanations. I didn't need an invitation to the wedding. I needed to be seen again, not for what I did, but for who I am. And now I am. So, to the ones who cooked without thanks, cleaned without praise, sacrificed without glory, this story is for you. The quiet warriors, the invisible champions. Healing isn't loud, but when it comes, it wraps around your heart and says, "You matter." Still, I was not good enough for one day, but I became irreplaceable every day since. And if you stayed until the end of this story, maybe you've felt it too, the ache, the unfairness, the silent victories. So before you scroll away, take a moment to reflect. Then follow Grace's truth, because tomorrow, another voice will whisper a story just like mine. You'll want to hear it.